about how we can detect it. In our research, we developed a number of case studies, and basically developed the argument or the parameters that these are situations where the algorithm makes use of financial data, for example, microstructure data, and can also leverage powerful computational tools to deceive other market participants, to particularly secure a financial position or anticipate certain trends. And typically these strategies are things like spoofing. Spoofing is where somebody places a bid or an offer with the intent of canceling just before the order is filled. So you basically withdraw the order just at the very last second before the order is actually executed. Or another strategy that has been documented is what we call pinging. Pinging describes a situation where you enter a number of small marketable orders, for example, just 100 shares, in order to learn about large hidden orders that are lingering on a particular stock exchange. So if somebody places a number of small orders of just 100 shares, and it's always the same number, then you can be pretty certain that this is an algorithm doing it, because otherwise humans typically place much higher orders. But this is an example of particular momentum is being created in the market, and then other big orders come out of the bushes. These are just examples of established strategies that we know that we've been observing for years now. But what is new is, for example, that these strategies can also be cross-market. So they can be across different trading venues, across different stock exchanges, or they can be even cross-asset, which means that, as an example, we have derivatives that are typically priced in relation to the underlying asset. And a manipulator can find incentive, for example, to manipulate the latter, the asset, after accumulating a position in the derivative. So that will be a manipulation across assets. And this is really something new that humans, at least so far, haven't really done. Final aspect, there is a prospect that algorithms may also use information-based forms of manipulation. So using simple, publicly available information that is available online and use it in order to optimize a particular trading strategy. So these are examples for market manipulation. And the second strategy that we look at is even more scary to some extent, that is collusion. Right? So what we show is that there is a trend towards collusion between different algorithms to manipulate certain prices. You can say tacit collusion because we don't really fully know how this collusion really happens. At least they're not talking to each other. So this trend has long been studied in the antitrust context. So can algorithms manipulate prices, form cartels, for example, that sort of thing? And there's a well-known study by Ezraki and Stuckey from 2017, but it hasn't really been studied in the context that I'm talking about capital markets. And what we show is that there are a number of factors that do facilitate this collusion. For example, in situations where we have high market transparency, frequency of interaction between the different players, a certain homogeneity between the products, a certain market concentration, and finally high entry barriers and innovation. So these are all factors, if they are present, that this type of collusion may happen and may become even more prominent. Again, we have a number of evidence in lab experiments, but the role of communication, how those different algorithms communicate with one another, is still quite an unanswered and open question. Again, we developed a number of case studies of where this can happen. And just to give you a quick summary, under certain conditions, certain requirements, independent trading algorithms may find those ways to coordinate behavior or to decode their rival strategies. And examples where this may happen are quote-driven markets. So these are relatively concentrated These are markets with a concentrated number of design professionals, so for example, market makers, that are responsible for continuously posting their bids and ask quotes they are willing to accept. And the other example is the benchmarks, the financial benchmarks, which have a fundamental role as a reference value for the pricing of other financial assets. So this may lead to some sort of benchmark manipulation. So again, a bit of a scary prospect. This is a reality, however. We have to face it, and we have to think about what we can do about it. And this is what I'm coming to now, because of course we need to respond to the development. And what does our legal framework do about this? Well, our traditional liability law, or tort law, faces a big struggle, because legal systems all around the world, I'm sure that Argentina is no different, they typically require some sort of evidence or some proof of the scienter of the intent, or some sort of subjective element that there is something going on. Somebody wanted to do harm, somebody wanted to commit this particular crime. That's an example of something that legal systems require. And the other thing is that in many legal systems, the law can only attribute liability for things that you have done or omissions that you have done that were committed by a natural person from flesh and blood. And this applies in both categories, in market abuse and in antitrust. And you can easily imagine that it's quite difficult to apply those legal elements to the different situations that I was talking about. So for example, when you think about intent, it's very difficult to imagine a situation where an algorithm really takes independent decisions to find somebody, a human in the chain, who really had the intent of committing exact that crime or exact that fraud. So you have to look along the long and opaque supply chain of the AI and try to say, this is exactly the human person who had intent. Extremely difficult to establish. Causation is the next problem. Again, if you have a truly autonomous AI agent, there will be a break in the causation chain. And all the lawyers in the room will know what I'm talking about. This is the first year in law school where you talk about causation. Did I cause this particular tort? Is there a causation between what somebody did in the beginning and the result that happened? When somebody kills another person, is then the mother of the killer responsible? Because, causation, at least there is a cause from giving birth to the actual harm that was done. But typically there is a filter, like the foreseeable thing. A truly autonomous action that intervenes may break the chain in causation between the wrongdoing and the alleged harm. So again, this is a challenge when we are facing and talking about truly autonomous AI agents. And finally, negligence, right? So not only enforcement authorities, but also the human experts who are involved in creating and developing artificial intelligence will not be able to anticipate and to foresee all the ways in which AI trading behaves. As I was explaining before, that there's almost like a black box. We cannot anticipate what the AI is doing, and we cannot explain it afterwards. That's the big problem. So these problems have already been described in the more traditional ATS, the algorithmic trading system. So the more deterministic, the more traditional ones that we have already been using for years, they already have these problems. And the AI that I'm talking about here, truly autonomous one, truly black box featuring AI, will further complicate this and will even make it more difficult. And in compliance, the stuff that you guys are talking about, there will be many technical and legal issues arising from the lack of explainability in decision making, because as I was saying, a black box really means that I cannot explain what really ultimately caused the AI to behave in a particular way. So out of the 1 million data points that went into the AI, you don't know afterwards which of the 1 million data points really caused the particular decision to be taken. And that's, of course, a nightmare for explainability later on, because you cannot explain what really triggered that decision and what didn't. And the same problem happens in enforcement, because authorities, of course, need to assess liability among a long list of individuals. And so they need to know who exactly was responsible, who contributed to the misconduct. And so we are really at a loss, and it's impossible to distinguish whether the misconduct resulted from just an unintended consequence, the bug in the system, or whether there was some human intent, as in the Athena example, or whether we have truly autonomous AI decision making. Let me be a bit more optimistic here. Let me slowly move to a close, because there are some hopes that we have a system called algorithmic governance. So these are ideas of how we could do something about the system. And some specific rules of algorithmic governance are in place in some jurisdictions. So you may intervene as a legal system on various levels. You could first intervene at the investment firm level, so the investment firm that uses the AI, and you could force them to notify that they are using AI. Okay, you could force them to maintain some sort of risk management, so they need to test, they need to validate, they need to deploy algorithms, and they need to have internal controls and controls to mitigate risk. The problem with this approach, I mean, it sounds quite tempting, but the problem is that it's largely self-reporting. So the investment firm doesn't have a great incentive to tell the supervisors, hey, by the way, we have an algorithm in our firm that is causing lots of problems, or that is making a lot of manipulative moves. So if you're just asking the investment firm itself to monitor the situation, then you have no guarantee that the misconduct will actually come to light at the end of the day. The second strategy could be to intervene at the trading venue level, so address the stock exchange itself. For example, to impose arrangements on the system's resilience, so the operational resilience, to deduce things like circuit breakers or rules on electronic trading. And again, that sounds logical, that you ask the trading venue to remain and to impose integrity. Here, the problem is strong misalignment of the incentives and certain conflicts of interest. What do I mean by this? Trading venues, stock exchanges are in competition with one another, and they all want to have the business, and they all want to have the electronic trading. So it's in their interest to keep as much business on the platform as they can. And so again, they will not be super tough on detecting and monitoring the misconduct that is happening. And the final strategy, of course, is to charge the market supervisors. Again, they have a bit of a marginal role to play here so far. At the moment, they lack a real due diligence process, and again, they rely on self-reporting. There's at the moment no credible supervisory architecture of AI traders, and the other problem is supervisors frequently lack a cross-market surveillance power. So they typically look at one particular market and not more. So to conclude, I think we really face an enormous difficulty in achieving real and effective transparency and auditability of machine learning methods. In principle, explainability would be super good, would be desirable, but super explainable AI is not effective. And so what we're facing here is the algorithmic governance that we have, but is somehow rooted in outdated assumptions. And in particular, the black box nature of machine learning methods that I talked about can really frustrate firms' ability to comply, can hamper the safe and legal implementation of trading strategies, and might ultimately also impair innovation. So final point, what would be more fruitful alternatives? Just a few ideas of what could be done. Ensure traceability, right? So make sure we know who's the human in the loop, who is the human who we can address, who we can talk to. Think about more adaptive forms of regulation. So move away from the command and control. This is the law and you have to comply. Yeah. So move towards new features of law. So, for example, more dynamic legal rules that you can frequently adapt and update along the way. Think about AI transparency, so a pre-approval authorization regime, but also constant monitoring, right? Because it's very difficult to know at the beginning what the algorithm can do. So you need to audit it over time, but ideally on a real-time market surveillance. So this would be demanding a lot of supervisors, I know, but this constant supervision is quite important. And ultimately, therefore, I argue for a greater role for supervisory technology, SupTech, to fill the gaps. So the supervisor needs to use technology itself, right? We need AI to supervise AI, in other words, because otherwise, with just humans, we will not achieve it. That's it. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion and to any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, George. It looks like it's a very challenging issue since trading it's also like a complex market itself, right? So it seems like our artificial intelligence builds on top of that sophistication and complexities. Seems like regulators are falling short, right, in terms of how to cope with this with all these issues. Seems like the traditional approach may not work, right? So how do you see going forward how the regulators and regulation may evolve in order to tackle these new market manipulations?
Yeah, so super interesting to look at the development. So I am discussing with some practitioners in the Dutch supervisors, the financial supervisor in the Netherlands, and they try to find out exactly what is happening. So they tell me this research is super important because these are really exactly the problems that we have. But the first important task that they have is to find out what part of the trading is actually done by AI. Because imagine you are a market supervisor and you sit there and you get millions of trades reported every day. And how do you know which of them were executed by humans, by just some electronic trading, which was, however, pre-programmed, so no problem here, and then some predeterministic AI, and then ultimately autonomous AI, right? How do you know? And so this guy was telling me, look, we are at the moment, we are really just seeing the tip of the iceberg. And the first task is really to find out on what scale is that happening. And we're going through this list of data points and we're trying to analyze which of them are really problematic, in other words. And we're trying to develop some patterns, he tells me, of what is suspicious, right? When there are lots of small orders, for example, as I was explaining earlier, lots of small orders in the same size, posted within the same second, for example, that's a strong indication that this is being carried out by some sort of algorithm. And then, of course, you need to go the next step. If you're pretty certain that this was an algorithm, then you need to verify that there was actually some mischief being carried out, right? And then you need evidence for this. And so it's super, super difficult. But I don't want to be in the shoes of a supervisor at the moment because really they face a big uphill struggle.
Yeah, since it's AI may affect both the scale and speed of the manipulation, right? Indeed. So this is posing a real threat on the whole system stability.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the fear, right? So well, no, I take it back. You're right in pointing out that this may be the next level then. So what I've analyzed is more where some harm is being done, right? And some investor loses money because the AI is outsmarting them. You know, the AI is simply faster and cleverer and detects patterns, and other people simply lose a lot of money. But you're right that there is another problem, which is financial stability. So if lots of algorithms, for example, invest in the same technology, in the same pattern, then we might have very parallel behavior, lots of, like lemmings. So they all follow the same tool, the same strategy. And that may lead to what we call herding, so concentration risks. Everybody invests into the same patterns and the same asset classes. And if that asset then collapses, then good night. So this is something that we already see in banking regulation when banks all use the same paradigms to invest, and they're all in the same way risky. And this causes financial panics, as we saw earlier this year in the Silicon Valley crisis.
So that's the use of a vast army of users trying to make this what I think you mentioned that, or you call that tacit manipulation, right? Tacit collusion.
Yeah.
That would be very, very, very difficult to spot, right? Since
Yes.
you need to have somehow a monitoring at system level, right?
It's already difficult to spot with human traders because humans may simply interact silently. They might just follow what other people are doing. And then there's already a question, is that something that we can penalize? Or does there have to be some interaction, right? So this is beyond the scope of my talk, but this is a big problem in antitrust law, as many people will know, to really have some sort of evidence that there was some collusion going on. Just copying what others do is maybe just a market economy, right? I just copy what others are doing. I just copy what successful people are doing, and that's competition. So there's a big gray zone here of what is legitimate, what isn't, and can we detect it ultimately?
And the monitor of human behavior, I mean, the trader behavior, right? It's been under strong monitoring since ever, right? Do you think the use, I mean, trying to think this from the bright side, right? This the use of AI to monitor human trading, do you think may in any way make it difficult, or do you think it will reduce what the traditional manipulations we have so far, or in any way there is any study or projection about using AI for enhancing financial institutions controls?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a positive development. So if we use AI in the supervisory authority, fantastic, because we can detect certain patterns, we can detect certain weird developments that normal humans wouldn't be able to see, right? So if you have these millions of data points, then we need technology to skim it, right? Just like the big data room in compliance, or the stuff that you guys are looking at. So that's definitely a help. The problem is, as soon as we use AI in the public authority, we run into new legal problems, because public institutions typically are bound by the rule of law and the principle of good administration. So, for example, you need to give a particular reason when you state certain decisions. Public authority must justify that decision. So, for example, they must justify the decision to give you or to refuse that you get a driving license, for example, right? And I must give a reason of why I refused to give you the driving license, so that you know what was wrong and that you can appeal against it. I mean, these are principles of the rule of law. And now the trouble is, if you use AI for all of this, then, as I was explaining, sometimes you don't know what ultimately triggered that decision. So there's a strong tension between using AI in the supervisory authority and a certain clash with long-established principles that public authorities are bound to. And that is a big question at the moment. So this is the next level, if you know.
Great, Joshua. Thank you so much for this, for giving us these insights on this sophisticated market and how AI may be used and misused in this area. So we hopefully we will keep discussing this throughout the entire from the rest of the conference and tomorrow. So thank you so much, George. We will have just 1 minute break, very short break. So we introduce and make sure everything works fine with the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was a great event, and have a nice rest of the day. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
so much, everyone, for joining for this very last panel. I have the great pleasure to introduce you to Josephine Nelson. She's visiting professor of law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And she's a friend of us. She's been invited many times for this for our workshops and our seminars. So it's great to close these very first days with you, Josephine. It's a great pleasure, and we hope we can close this. We've been very techy so far, right? So let's try to now give some hints on the key challenges you are foreseeing for compliance officers, and hopefully we can have a chat at the end of your presentation. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my great pleasure to be here, Raul. Thank you to the whole organization. I have really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to you. And along those lines, I would encourage you guys to throw things in the chat or the interactive tool here. I have asked Raul, and he has been so kind as to agree to do this, to watch the chat for me and to pull out some of the best questions and make sure that we talk about them a little bit at the end. So I'm not going to stop during the presentation to be reading the chat. That's just too distracting. But I will certainly be thinking about your questions and how to interact with you. And I've asked Raul to make sure that we really use that time right at the end of the day to get the feedback, to discuss how all of this works for you in practice, in your world. And it's kind of interesting to be following after George and some of the other people in this line, because as Raul suggested, what I'm going to talk about is, so what does this mean for a compliance officer? You don't necessarily have to do all the computer programming. In fact, now with ChatGPT and all these other tools, you know, the systems will do this for you. Yes, you may have to hire consultants. Yes, you may have to have some technical expertise. But ultimately, you're making the judgments and the decisions on how to run these systems. And you've heard many things about the problems of how human beings react to some of these systems. But I really want to talk to you about management, how you manage these systems. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And in fact, we have a lot of evidence that if you use these systems in ways that feel invasive, and destroy trust with employees and workers and other parts of your ecosystem, you create wrongdoing, you create sabotage. So it is very, very important in thinking about surveillance and thinking about compliance and thinking about artificial intelligence and thinking about the collection and use of data, to think about how it's experienced and whether it's a good idea to do this. Not just a good idea in the abstract of because data is always good. No, actually, data is really bad sometimes. And that is a controversial view that you don't hear often, but it's a really important one because we see major corporate scandals and misconduct and all the rest of it. We also see the rotting of organizations by over-reliance on this type of surveillance, especially in the overuse of AI. And I'm going to make the basic case that it's poor management. And this is controversial. I recognize that. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the pressure that's coming from regulators and from elsewhere to show that you're in control, to be collecting this data. But we need to talk about the downsides too, because just the sheer collection of the data can be a real problem. I want to tell you, it sends the wrong signals to many of your workers, and it changes the nature of the job itself for many of them. So if you, for example, are collecting the data on keystrokes and how often someone is jiggling their mouse, what have you done to their job? You have made their job keystrokes and jiggling the mouse. So they're going to slack each other all day rather than actually doing the deep work to produce that report and to be thinking about the things that you're asking them to think about. or you thought that you were asking them to think about. People say, well, is this gaming the system? And the answer is no, you have changed what the system is. You have changed what the job requires, and you're getting behavior accordingly. So be really careful with this stuff is the point. And many of you guys before have talked to me about the book that I wrote with the late Lynn Stout. And I wanted to flag for you some of these things out of the book so that you have the data. So you have the back of the book is, so first of all, I want to flag that the book is deliberately very inexpensively priced, less than $20. The reason for that is I wanted to get into people's hands, and I want you to have this as a resource so that if you get pushed to use this kind of surveillance, if you get pushed to engage in programs that make you uncomfortable, that you have the data and the sources and the citations to be able to say, no, actually, this is corrosive. This is dangerous to our company. We do not want to do this. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And it's not part of developing the kind of culture and organization that we want. And eventually, by the way, you won't be able to rely on the data. The data will be sabotaged. People will just commit fraud and give you the numbers. If what you want are numbers, we can give you numbers. The numbers will have no meaning, and you won't be able to run your company. So think about this, right? So anyway, I want to let you know the book is a resource for you. It is something that you can literally, I've had compliance officers tell me, I'm getting copies of this. I'm actually giving it to my clients who are pushing me, or my boss who doesn't quite understand this issue. I'm giving it to you as a tool, as a defensive measure, as a chance to show and justify what place judgment has in your job. Because I know that often as we talk about data, the judgment and the humanity of an organization can fall by the wayside. So let me fly through some of these things pretty fast. And then we'll talk about an actual application with communication so that you can see part of the problem in the alignment of thinking here. Oops, this is not advancing. There it is. Okay, so when we think about company culture, we have a lot of different associations with it, but I want to give for you another idea of culture, right? This is what we usually think of as culture, the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institutional organization. But culture has a different meaning, remember? Culture means to grow in a prepared medium. You have created a culture, things are going to grow there. Things happen there. That's a really important concept. And it's something that compliance officers have to be front and center on. So this is taking the metaphor of ethics as a garden, and it will grow something. You have a culture, it's going to grow something. Is it going to grow something that you're going to like, perhaps? Or is it going to grow something that's not going to make you happy? Whatever your version of this is. Some people said, oh, well, I actually really like, wild plants and fine. Make sure you know what is growing in your culture and you select what is growing in your culture, because something is going to grow there anyway. And it could be weeds. It could be things that you don't want. In fact, I guarantee that will be what happens if you don't pay attention to this. And I want to flag this as management, a core issue of management. What is management? Management is the process of dealing with or controlling things or people, right? It means to align people within an organization and bind them to pursue the organization's purpose. It does not mean monitor the heck out of them. It does not mean surveil them day and night. It does not mean unleash AI on them to tell them how to do every piece of their job so that they leave. It is to bind, to bring together, to think about what unifies people and keep that core. Because if you don't, people leave, and they leave at astonishing rates. I will just flag for you that the short version is management is about people and how to get the best out of them. It's not about collecting statistics that may have literally no meaning and that your people will lie to you about if they don't feel invested in them. I'm going to flip through some of this issue about cheating, but essentially the issue is that the landscape is that it's about 7 to 8% of every group. You can see this in, how many people cheat on online applications, in gaming and on their MBA. essays, every part, it's about 7-8% of the world is about hardcore cheaters, and they will cheat for tiny amounts of money in laboratories all the time. Then there's about 2 to 3%, this is far less well studied, who are really rigid and will not cheat under any circumstances. But if you take the 7-8% with the 2 to 3% of people who are aligned with you anyway, the 7-8% people are going to be a problem, but the 2 to 3% people are aligned with you anyway, that means that's 10% of the population that's locked up, which means that 90% of us are in the middle. And the battle is for the middle. It's for the 90% of people who are swayed by, guess what, culture and the environment and literally the medium that they are in. So we need to think about this strongly, because that 90% can go toward the 7 or 8%, or it can go toward the 2 to 3% who are going to be your supporters anyway. And if you get the 90%, they actually instinctively want to go toward the 2 to 3%. They don't want to go toward the 7-8%. And we see this actually in online systems where we can watch what people are doing without them knowing that we're watching them, which is always an issue with misconduct, right? But we can see that in a normal system, which has established rules in which people have buy-in and feel invested and as though they're engaged and have voice, right? All these are very important points. That what will happen is the 90% plus the 2 to 3% will actually ostracize the 7 to 8%, and the cheaters are left being labeled as cheaters and only trading amongst themselves, and they have to trade at massive discounts because no one will extend credit to them, no one will deal with them, right? So you really have to think about what your culture is and what message that 90% is getting about what you want to see from them. Not measure the heck out of them through anonymous web, dashboards and the rest of it, but communicate and get out there and talk to them. And what we see is with a lot of this technology, people feel uncomfortable actually giving feedback, actually talking, communicating with employees. The conversations that you can have are really important. And I want to flag for you also that, we are talking multiculturally, but we're talking about people around the world being motivated by universal values, not the manifestation of the values. The behavior can be very different. So you'll have people every once in a while and say, oh, I know what you're talking about. It's the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. That's what's unifying people around the world. Oh, no, not at all. In some cultures, you must kill. It's an honor killing. You're defending your honor. You're defending your organization. You're defending, right? You must kill. In other cultures, no, under no circumstances shall you kill, even if it's in self-defense or in some other way, right? So we have vastly different behaviors, but the underlying manifestations of how we behave across all cultures seem to actually be fairly uniform. And if you can tie into the fundamental values, and they tend to be about 6. I added a few more, which we tend to see around the edges, which can, in some cultures, be the word that is used instead of another word. So sometimes it's fairness, sometimes it's justice, sometimes it's equality, but there are definite ideas of reciprocity, respect, dignity, honesty, integrity, right? Very, very core. And if you explain to your people, look, this is an issue of respect. We're asking you to do these things. We're asking you, this is an issue of justice. This is an issue of fairness. This is how this company is going to articulate this value and express this value. And even if you think paying a bribe, for example, is greasing the wheels, we find this to be an issue of inequality because we can't pay the same bribe to everyone. So we don't want to be paying a bribe, and getting into paying bribes, by the way, is illegal, but also is an issue of equality, is an issue of how our company expresses our values. This is not who we are. We explain who we are, and then we explain what we are not. And that hooks employees around the world. That hooks your workers. That is something that people can understand and manifest, where they see there will always be conflicts of values. I like this person. I want to reward them. I want to give them a bribe. But then you have to explain, no, there's a conflict of values here with equality or justice, fairness, or something else. And in this situation, these are the calls we are asking you to make. That is our culture. literally. You've got to do that work. You can't just be watching a dashboard and not talking to people. So the really interesting thing in behavioral ethics, as we look at what people actually do, and again, there's been a huge revolution in behavioral ethics over the last 10, 15 years. We have a lot of experimentation where we know what people actually do, not just what we imagine they might do in the abstract, but people are respond very differently to rules than we think they do. And I think that's very important. So ethics are simultaneously intuitive and counterintuitive, right? We have vast agreement on what people should do. Almost everyone believes in those universal values. And if you can hook something to a universal value, you will get amazing compliance and buy-in. But we don't understand sometimes why they don't do that. So what's going on? If we have 90% of the population that wants to get to a pro-social outcome, we have another 2 to 3% of the population that are fairly rigid and will do that. We have 92, 93% of the population locked up if we do this right. So how are we not doing this right? How are we getting in our own way? What are we not communicating? What are we not doing? Very important takeaways, and I'm going to fly through these. First, the modern behavioral ethics demonstrate how influenced we are by the situation and power structures in which we find ourselves. We are not the same person on the steps of a church, mosque, synagogue, or something else as we are the same day on the trading floor. Even the same afternoon, we'll get very different responses. If you ask for charity donations on the steps of a church, mosque, synagogue, after Sunday school, whatever it is, you will get one response. If you ask the very same person in the middle of the trading day, when they are busy and they talk about business necessities, you will get a very different response from someone who sees their identity as the same, right? So we are very influenced by situations. If you have a chance, I strongly, and I'm not going to be able to talk about this in the very short presentation, I strongly recommend you look at this, you actually sit there and watch. I had my classes at Harvard Business School, sit there and watch the videos of the Milgram experiment. Very important. I'm not going to explain what the experiment was, but people will do horrendous things in response to authority, and they'll do it being uncomfortable, but they will absolutely do it. And it's not an issue of class, race, religion, training. We can get people to do terrible things. That 90% of the population will do terrible, terrible things if we put them in the wrong situations. And we do not communicate what it is that we want as the values that we want them to act on. And we don't reward those values, right? If you sit behind the computer screen and you just have the dashboard flags come up, you're going to have terrible behavior that gets out of control out there, and a terrible culture that then grows more of that. So second big takeaway, we tend to have unrealistic expectations of the power of rules and other policy guidelines. We think we've made a rule, that's it, we're done. Guess what? Not so much, right? People don't understand if they don't have buy-in. This can actually create more misconduct. It creates hypocrisy and misconduct, and it makes your job harder. So you've got to think about how you're designing rules. Are you hooking into those values? Are you explaining what the values are? Are you creating a self-reinforcing culture where you pick out and reward people who act on those values? What are the stories that your organization tells? Do you tell the story of someone who went out of their way to do something wonderful for someone, even if it cost the company money? Do you tell the story of somebody who, you name it, you illustrate the value and how you want it expressed, and then you go out of your way to reward that? I also want to flag for you, if you have a company motto or code of ethics and you do not enforce it and you do not reward people who follow it, it is worse than not having one. You create hypocrisy, and it is, and you create sabotage, and you create wrongdoing. The code has to be something that is described, is lived, is repeated by managers, becomes part of who we are and the way that we do things. It's got to be the language of ethics, and the language of doing something because it's part of our values has to become at every point from supervisors who understand that this is what they're doing. They're creating a culture, they're reinforcing a culture, they are signaling all these things, and that will get them the behavior that they want, because people need to understand how that's supposed to be manifest. So this has to be part of everyday discussions modeled by supervisors. Remember, if you do not have transparency, accountability, and consistency of treatment, you'll get hypocrisy. And remember, that undermines this very fast. You need a speak up culture. This is Dr. Trevino's work. This is other people's work. Psychological safety to bring up issues. This is Amy Edmondson's work and other people's work. Very, very important. No retaliation. This is a big one, and it is very common. And here's what happens. If there is retaliation within the organization, you're not going to hear from whistleblowers. Why would you want to hear from whistleblowers? Because, and this is another paradigm shift, they're your best asset. Almost 92% of whistleblowers report internally first. Why do they do that when actually in the United States and in many other countries that hurts them legally? It's because they're doing it for moral reasons. They're the people who care enough, who are coming to talk to you. There are actually very, very few false reports, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and these other things. It is incredibly rare. If someone cares enough about your company to come tell you about an issue, you have to protect them like gold. That is the best early warning sign you can possibly get. Any company that says they have no compliance reports, you're living in North Korea. It's a culture of fear. That was the expression that people used about Volkswagen before its fall. That what was the culture at Volkswagen? It was North Korea without labor camps. Do you think that you're going to talk in that kind of culture? Are you going to tell people what's going on? Are you going to keep widespread misconduct from growing? No, you're going to cooperate it with that. You're going to lose your 90%. And then your 7 to 8% of hardcore cheaters are happy to, broaden the misconduct, make it worse, amplify it, all the rest of it. You are fighting for the 90%, and you lost your 90% there easily, fast, and it's way out the door, down the hill, and past the river. Really, really hard to do, especially when it comes to sexual harassment things. These numbers have been doubling in the United States every 2 years, which is terrifying. So we went from 22 to 44 to 88 to I believe it was 98 recently on retaliation claims. And a lot of these things are illegal to retaliate against employees, but it happens, and it's happening increasingly. And this is really toxic to our culture, because you're going to drum out the people who care about the company the most, who are the most ethical, who frankly should be your leaders. Think about that. The reason why people become whistleblowers to external regulators is because they weren't treated properly internally. And they almost always came to the company first, talked about it, and you created the whistleblower who was so frustrated that they went externally. And now you have a big problem. This is your chance to deal with it. Yes, even if it's against the CEO, yes, you've got to do it. And you've got to do it transparently, accountably, and with consistency of treatment. All right. And guess what? Retaliation rates go up and up and up when supervisors look the other way. Okay, some other takeaways: focusing on group outcomes, focusing only on outcomes and not on processes, creates cheating and scandals in these behaviors. The last big takeaway is we need to think in terms of systems that create behavior, not just liability for individuals put into places within those systems. In other words, if you just replace the person who is under pressure to falsify those results, guess what the very next person in that position will do? Within a very short period of time, they're doing the same thing. Yes, there's got to be individual liability, but ultimately you're talking about a culture, you're talking about a system, you're talking about the incentives that you have put in place, that your company has decided to put in place, what culture is and what culture is not. And it's very, very important, because people pick up these signals. We are highly social. We are highly attuned to these things. We absolutely care, and we vote accordingly with our feet. All right, thinking about this, fixing the system, especially as compliance people, we are in charge of the system usually. And you got to think not just in terms of bad apples, in bad barrels perhaps, but truly we are talking about the management of the orchard. If you have rampant disease across your orchard, it's not just an apple or two. It has become a set of issues that have now permeated the entire area, and it can be all of your trees in the entire orchard. It is the management of the orchard that is at issue. Fundamentally and honestly, and that is a hard mirror to look into, but that is a really important one because it also tells you what you can do differently. It tells you where those issues come from and how to turn them around. And yes, the first time that you address those issues, it's going to be difficult. You're going to get a spike in complaints because all of a sudden people are going to find out, wait a minute, I can actually report something. What will happen? I want to know, right? And everybody's watching, and then they start to trust you, and you get more and more reports, and you feel like the whole thing, the whole system is coming apart. It's not. You are hearing about the things that were there before. You are hearing about those things, and these are opportunities to turn it around, to send a different message. People are watching it, how you react to these issues. So very related to retaining talent, diversity, all kinds of issues. Your best innovators, your star performers will leave with over surveillance and overuse of AI. They don't trust you anymore, and they don't like what you're doing, and they will absolutely leave. And they'll be some of the first, as well as all the other sources of innovation and productivity that you've been trying to cultivate. People are very sensitive to this, amazingly so. I have a lot of statistics on that, but I'm going to fly through this. Finally, summaries in 4 major areas. So how was the book built? And thinking about this as a resource for you, it's really in 4 pieces. There's an overview, what the science says. Absolutely, we have long history, beautiful tradition of moral philosophy as well, but really core what the science says, what we have been learning these last 10, 15 years in behavioral ethics. The second section, in thinking about legal information, understanding reporting structures and obligations, then the mechanics, what kinds of misconduct do we actually see? What's really out there? What patterns are we experiencing? And then thinking in terms of leadership, what are the best practices? How do you design an ethical culture? And then, of course, investigations and a really good set of resources for you. So we talked a little bit about the things in the first section, how we act versus who we think we are. And then a little bit about things in the last section about how to design for ethical behavior, but there's a lot more in between. And like I said, it really was a labor of love, very reasonably priced to try to get it into your hands, to give you a tool, to give you something that you can then cite, pass on, whatever you need to. All right, so it's with the Oxford University Press. Like I said, they fought us tooth and nail on that list price, but that was really what we wanted, $18.95. And it was deliberately so that we could get these to you. I'm going to take the last couple of seconds here and go to sharing another presentation, which is a kind of interesting application of this. I know some of you have been, feeling pressure from regulators and thinking about what's happening. So we've been watching the Securities and Exchange Commission and the CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, as well as a series of UK regulators clamp down on use of personal devices, especially in the financial sector, but elsewhere. According to these agencies, the issue is lack of compliance with the books and records requirement of the federal security laws, failure to, quote, maintain, preserve, or produce records that were required to be kept under the CFTC record-keeping requirements. In the UK, there are multiple versions of retention of business-related correspondence and records. Again and again, we see from the regulators this issue of failure to supervise, right? And you can see that the regulators are moving on this. So the SEC back in September 2022 charged 15 broker-dealers with settlements over 1.1 billion with a B. In August, they have again been very active. So we were watching August 8th and August 29th, charges against more broker-dealers and a duly registered broker-dealer and investment advisor, more settlements. We're waiting to see what happens against Citigroup Global Markets with record-keeping failures in a new area with underwriting expenses. This is traveling, right? The CFTC in September went against 11 financial institutions, and the settlements were 710 million there. Watching what's happening in the UK, there's a lot of this picking up. So in April of last year, the Prudential Regulation Authority, the PRA, censured an inactive bank. But then in August, Ofgem, the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets in the UK, fined Morgan Stanley a significant sum, 6.9 million for these kinds of things. The mortgage regulators were moving in too. I could pull those numbers for you, but just some of the financial companies involved. I pulled a series of, this is not exhaustive, but you know, there's some big names in here: Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, Wells Fargo, BNP Paribas, lots and lots of people that you recognize. So what has been the reaction here? The beef was that that there was trading and business activity that was not properly supervised happening over traders' private phones. What did they agree to do? The companies were going to do more surveillance and more crackdown, hiring more compliance experts, outside compliance experts, you know, building more systems, buying more software, and lots of retaliation. A lot of this was built. Deutsche Bank announced it was docking the bonuses of employees who misused WhatsApp. You know, there was a ton of really deep interpersonal bitterness around that forcing employees and other workers to hand in their personal devices to be scanned, to be monitored. You know, what were their communications about their personal health care, their communications with their significant others. It was a very, very bitter experience for everyone. But what should have happened? Ultimately, I want to posit, this went way, way, way in the wrong direction and continues to do so. First of all, why are traders working around the clock on personal devices for work stuff? It's very easy to separate work and personal devices. Just have all work materials and work conversations on work devices. I honestly, like, we have the technology for this. Buying work devices and making sure that work devices are locked and secured is peanuts for these companies. So there has to be something else going on. Why are they trying to get on personal devices? Why are they pushing employees to use personal devices and therefore have the excuse to monitor those personal devices? Yeah, I would argue it was sloppy management. It was absolutely sloppy management during the during pandemic, when people went home, because those tends to be the dates for these, and the companies were so used to you know, having the traders work around the clock that they were fine having them work at home. Well, think about having work devices as work devices and only as work devices. It's easy to build software this way. It's easy to lock those systems down. It's easy to say, you know what, we want you to do work activities only in certain areas, and actually we will make sure that, you know, you can't communicate with people about work issues from personal devices. This could have been completely separated. And instead, what the companies are doing is using this as an excuse to get more involved with the private lives of their employees, which means more control, more surveillance, more lack of trust, more and more and more very insidious behavior, which we have a lot of evidence reduces the quality of life for people who work for these firms. It makes them far more transactional, far more likely to sabotage, and frankly, increases the price of what you have to pay people if they're working in that kind of environment. You could save a lot of money on salaries if you just treated people better. It's a very different kind of model. It's a different way of thinking about this, but I flag it for you because the regulators are really thinking about this as a command and control system. Too often compliance officers are feeling that and responding accordingly, and they're actually creating the misconduct. They're creating the sabotage. They're also creating the poisoning of environments that that leads to really, really big scandals. All right, so those are some things to throw out for you. I'm sure that Raul has been looking at the chat, and we have to ask him what came across.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much, Josephine. I do have a lot of questions. But first of all, I would like to And I would like to say that I obviously bought your book, and I would like to recommend everyone to do that, because it's a great recollection of a lot of useful question written in a very easy to read way. And as you said in the preface, you said that this book is was a labor of love, right? And I like that very much. And also you said that you try to make business law concepts accessible and understandable for business people, right? So now since all of this is at the heart of decision making, how can we as compliance officers convince, top management to actually use this ethic criteria when making decisions, when they are under such a huge pressure that we at the moment have in our regions, right? The context is pushing everyone very, very, very much. So what can you recommend compliance officer to approach, perhaps not just top management, but middle managers as well, in order to factor in this ethics criteria in the decision-making process?
Yeah. Well, I think the science is pretty clear. I mean, it's fascinating that the science has given us this same answer about, look, if you treat people differently, they react differently. And we have evidence of that. I mean, it's been 10, 15 years of really revolutionary science and very well-designed studies and double-blind, peer-reviewed. This is not actually controversial in the academic community in very important ways. Like, we know this now, and we know that we destroy this. We destroy the ability of companies to actually run their organizations. And I think if you are talking to someone who is in the C-suite and feeling pressure, often they feel out of control. And we hear this, especially once COVID happened, all my people disappeared. How am I going to know what they're actually doing? How do I actually make sure that they're working for me? There were all these, it was actually ironic, we heard all of these, horror stories of, well, someone's working 2 jobs remotely and I feel cheated if they were one of my jobs. Well, how many jobs do you think Elon Musk is doing right now, right? Like, this is a ridiculous thing to talk about. If how many CEOs would actually put up with somebody monitoring their behavior and saying, oh, well, you can't go to that networking lunch because it's not directly related to the blah, 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 right? They're not thinking about the lack of respect and the issue of how it has changed the work experience for people. Good luck. Even Elon Musk's lawyers can't sit on him to actually do one thing at a time and respond to the SEC's orders. He's got $20 million in sanctions so far, personally, in fines for just tweeting when he shouldn't be. I suppose it's called X now, but yes, like changing the name was going to fix all the problems in the company. It's a fundamental issue of, how are you treating people? What is the atmosphere of what you're doing? And frankly, can you even run an organization? I think what we're discovering is, again and again, if you go to these kinds of surveillance methods and you poison a culture, you cannot trust the statistics that come from it. People will lie to you. If you tell them effectively through your actions, lie to me, these are the statistics I want, they will give you those statistics. I mean, we have known since the 1950s that if you require quotas, you are literally telling people to cheat. And we have example after example after example, right? if you do, you have to be more sophisticated in thinking about what the job is and what you want from people. Because if you just go to these numbers, the numbers are meaningless. You know, if I worked with several CEOs who are big sailors, and they like this analogy, so I'll put this out there for people. One CEO who was a sailor said, "Wait, you mean I will have rot all through the boards of my ship, and when I try to unfurl my sail and tack hard left or tack hard right, it's going to be full of holes and nothing will work?" And that's exactly the revelation, right? You think you have a seaworthy ship. You do not have a seaworthy ship. Wait until something hits and you actually have to tack hard, tack right, ask something of your people, and your whole ship falls apart. And it's a sudden revelation for, the person who hasn't been maintaining the decks and hasn't been thinking about whether the sail is, sound and all these other things, right? You've been collecting lots of information. You may know the measurements of the boat. You may know, all kinds of things about the way the wind direction is going, but you do not have a seaworthy vessel. And so it's really important to have them understand that this is the core of management, to make sure you have a vessel to sail, right? Your troops are not following you. And you may think that you're Elon Musk going to the moon or, Mars or wherever,
Right.
SpaceX, but your rocket ship may not work. Your rocket ship may explode right there on the pad, and no one else is going to work for you. And now you have to pay people tremendous amounts of money, and they're in there and out of there, and they have no pride for that. Like, you have no way to actually double down, triple down, quadruple down on command and control so that every little knob in that rocket ship is going to work. You have to hire people and respect them enough and have them invested enough in the job to make sure that whoever decided how to order the bolts and put them in did it the right way.
And enforcement plays a role, right? I mean, and I want to ask you if for those jurisdictions where perhaps enforcement is not working that fast and properly as may be working in other jurisdictions, how can we or what can be said internally in order to compensate that lack of enforcement and lack of perhaps consequences that people may see that this is all like a beautiful painting, but with no actual enforcement. So is there anything you may suggest compliance officer to respond to that when talking to senior management?
Well, I think we have to shift the frame here, because we have been so heavy on the enforcement. We haven't had any discussion. I mean, you can beat your kids all day, every day. I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's probably illegal in some places. But are you going to grow good human beings out of that? Or maybe sit down with them and say, look, we eat with a knife and fork. We do this. Yes, you're going to learn to read. Like, you have to actually be thinking about what you want and not just, beating everybody and everything with a stick. And I think the other thing which is really revolutionary about this is there's a whole industry out there who would like to sell you lots of enforcement products, right? They make money by selling you these surveillance products. They make money by watching what everyone had for breakfast and, what could possibly be between their teeth. And they don't have any consequences for destroying your organization. They can just sell you more software and convince you that the problem is, that you haven't bought the latest package of goods. But ultimately, you have to run your organization, and you have to have people who want to show up there and want to be doing things, and you have to explain what it is that you would like them to do. And a lot of this software gets in the way. It literally, it drives out young people. It drives out people who actually would like to talk to you. You know, if you're relying on software to the point where you know that somebody is, you know, working in Excel today and you would like them to be in PowerPoint or something like that, that is what that should do is say, wait a minute, how come I haven't had a phone call with this person? You know, you have to teach people to manage. And I think if you called that person, you might find out that they have a toddler at home and they can do data entry on Excel, and it's not the day to be doing the big PowerPoint. They are actually doing exactly what Elon Musk would say that he's doing. He's prioritizing his time, given the circumstances that he's in and the opportunities that he's in. And honestly, that's probably what you want your employees to do. You know, if they have a 2-year-old at home, let them do data entry for the day if that is part of their job, and today makes more sense as a data entry day, right? You should be having that conversation rather than just docking them because you see something flash on a screen. And I want to say this is a generational thing too. Younger generations really need face-to-face contact. They are way too likely to text, to ghost you, to whatever, and they are not getting the mentoring that they need, and they are not finding out the basics of workplace culture. And we heard a huge hue and cry about how difficult the millennials were as a generation to manage. Just wait till you meet Gen Z and Gen Alpha, right? They desperately need this contact with you. They desperately need this building of norms. They desperately need all the rest of this. And they actually are very excited and willing and want to do well. And if all you do is beat them, they will leave, and they are leaving, or they will demand an enormous amount of money and think about this as a transaction and an oppositional relationship. And then you have, sabotage and all kinds of things on your hands. So it is absolutely up to you to set the tone and often teach people what is expected in that environment. And that is actually very cheap. If the software and the monitoring is expensive, this is cheap. This is as simple as highlighting the behavior that you want in the newsletter, making sure the CEO picks out the right people, talking about what happened with enforcement actions, maybe, obviously stripping them so they're confidential, but showing people that when somebody came and brought you an issue, you did something about it. You did something important about it and it was treated respectfully. That's the kind of stuff, that's cheap. That's not going to fuel an entire compliance software industry, but it's the way we need to manage. And it's the way you keep your organization and allow your organization to do great things.
So 1 more minute for the last one. Okay.
Okay.
Good. And you will do a great favor for the closing remarks. So Josephine, where do you think the compliance officer role is going to?
I think the compliance officers, I think they're really savvy, good compliance officers, know their organizations, and have an enormous opportunity in management. I think it is a disadvantage to be pigeonholed into just, I surveil everyone and I handle these tech systems. There are lots of IT people, lots of engineering people, lots of other people who can build all that stuff and do that stuff better. Our particular competitive advantage is in thinking about how to bring people along, how to build the organization and get the best out of people. And that is a core management skill. And ultimately, if you think about progression through a company, young people are hired for their data entry. Young people are hired for, showing up first thing in the morning, working till the night, carrying buckets of things, right? The higher up you get in an organization, the more your managerial skills matter, the more your ability to get other human beings to do what you need them to do. Again, what is management? Management is alignment of people, assets, resources, all the rest of this for an organization's purpose. And if you prove that you can do that and help actually with your hand on the rudder steer a seaworthy ship to do amazing things, you are a very valuable sailor. You are absolutely the first mate, and you will be considered for CEO in that kind of role. That's the kind of distinguishing leadership role that we should want.
That's exactly right, and it's also very linked, very connected to the purpose of the organizations, right, and also for trust building, which I mean it's incredibly important for the future of organization, no matter how pressed we are by the context, right? So thank you so much, Josephine, for your generosity, for being here with us. I do recommend everyone again taking a look at your book, which is so inspirational, and of course we will be inviting you again in the future for a workshop or another conference. Thank you so much, Josephine.
Take care, guys. Thank you for all the amazing work that you do. You are the ones who make things happen, and we are very grateful. Thank you for what you do and who you are.
So back to Spanish. Bueno, para cerrar muy rápido, nada más agradecerles a todos por acompañarnos durante este día e invitar, por supuesto, a que nos acompañen el día de mañana, que vamos a estar presenciales, y para quienes no puedan venir, acercarse hasta Pilar, hasta nuestro campus, pueden también hacerlo a través de estos medios digitales. Hemos tenido un día súper rico con unos puntos de vista que hemos tratado de partir desde la mirada de los desafíos que nos ofrecen los distintos stakeholders. Mañana vamos a estar siguiendo ese tema. Vamos a también continuar con la cuestión de la tecnología en compliance y cómo la podemos aprovechar por un lado, pero por otro lado también tomar precauciones para prevenirnos de su lado B. Hemos conversado hoy algunos temas súper interesantes relacionados con la ciberseguridad, la privacidad de datos. Hemos intentado introducir el mundo del data management y la inteligencia artificial, conscientes de que para muchos de nosotros esto es materia novedosa, y estamos dando los primeros pasos en el uso de estas herramientas de inteligencia artificial generativa, ¿no? Somos de una generación que probablemente muchos no nativos digitales, así que estamos ahora mismo empezando este camino de ponernos a tono con estas herramientas nuevas, ¿no? Mañana vamos a continuar entonces explorando las distintas perspectivas del uso de estas herramientas, y también vamos a estar conversando bastante desde la perspectiva penal respecto de estos riesgos, y vamos a estar cerrando con un panel espectacular con compliance officers para debatir el rol del compliance officer a futuro. Así que esperamos vernos en persona mañana, y quienes no puedan, entonces también lo haremos por acá. Muchas gracias y nos estamos entonces viendo el día de mañana. Chao.